Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, the Ninja Turtles are back in action. Helen Mirren takes the 100-foot journey. Tornado chasers go into the storm. And Philip Seymour Hoffman gives his last starring performance in A Most Wanted Man. In our home media moment, we'll review The Missing Picture. We'll also look at older films, Paranorman, the original 1990 version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Oscar-nominee American Splendor. And with that film, we wrap up the American section of our Oscar A to Z. And so we have a bit of a different top 5 for you this week. It's our top 5 films with America, or American, somewhere in the title. So we'll get to all of that coming up. First up, though, we get to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Joe's going to tell us about that.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014 is a reboot of the film franchise based on the larger franchise and is directed by John Liebsman and produced by Michael Bay. It stars Megan Fox, Will Arnett, Johnny Knoxville, and William Fichtner. Much like the first film, this one starts with the reporter April O'Neil, played by Fox, investigating a series of crimes committed by the organization known as the Foot Clan and a group of mysterious vigilantes who seem to be stopping them. After discovering these vigilantes are their titular heroes, her life is in danger and she and the Turtles embark on a plan to end the Foot's hold on the city. I really want to be fair and try not to let bias get in the way. Thankfully, I don't really have to because this film is just bad in the most basic areas. First, let's start with the biggest problem. Much like the Transformers films, this film makes a similar mistake of focusing more time on the human characters than the ones we actually want to see. In addition, also like the Transformers films, these characters are not ones we like. At the very least, make the focal point the good ones. Megan Fox is at her worst here, at least in the other films she was trying, and here she's just terrible. It's obvious, but it's still a fact. In addition, her character makes so many dumb decisions I find it hard to believe she's actually employed as a reporter. Just to cite an example, setting a flash on your camera in a darkened area and acting surprised when the Turtles notice you. Do you know how cameras work? Then there is the fact that Shredder, one of the most awesome villains of the 80s, is reduced to a thug with no personality, kind of like Megatron in the Transformers movies. See the pattern yet? The plot is also almost point for point a rip-off of The Amazing Spider-Man, right down to the final climax. It's so glaring, it's ridiculous. On the plus side, though, the Turtles themselves actually are kind of entertaining, though they do look kind of ugly to me, and some of the action scenes turn out decent, and there are some genuine laughs with the Turtles, though few and far between. I'm not really sure if kids will like this movie, but I would recommend it any of the previous films, comics, video games, or cartoons. This is the one part of the franchise you want to avoid, and I give it a D+.
Wow. Now, how does that compare to the 2006 version of the movie?
TMNT?
Yeah.
It's one of the weaker movies, but it's still a lot better than this one.
Okay. Well, for me, as we'll actually go over a little bit later in the 1990 version, I have zero attachment to the Turtles and the brand, so I can't speak to what a huge Turtles fan will think of this movie. That's definitely more your area, Joe. And perhaps that skews my opinion a bit. This version of the film absolutely has its issues. Notably for me was its identity crisis in tone. It wants to be like hard and dark while trying to stay true to this jokey nature and be good for younger viewers that, the cartoon series has done, etc. And that includes, no bad language or anything, which is fine, but then it's like really violent for kids. So, it's got that identity problem, and it definitely does not work. And April O'Neil, my problem with her character isn't so much that she was maybe not that bright, because she is portrayed sort of smartly, but you're right, she makes a lot of dumb decisions. But my biggest problem was any smart decision she makes, anytime she actually helps, it's undercut in every single scene with some comment about how hot she is. And that kind of got on my nerves as well. I thought the action scenes were also very frantic and over-directed, especially the one in the snowdrifts when they're, hurtling down the mountain.
I thought that was the best part, actually.
Oh, see, I thought it was way too, frantic and,
At least you could see what was happening. Most of the time you couldn't in the darkened areas. So.
I don't know. I had some trouble with that one, with, knowing exactly what was happening, just because the camera was all over the place. But anyway, when all is said and done, I have to say that I actually did kind of like it. I thought it was fun. I laughed a few times. And if this was not being said on a show, I would deny ever saying it, but I thought Megan Fox actually did a decent job.
That's horrible.
And I know, I mean, I don't know the character, so whether she did a good job portraying April specifically, certainly I can't speak to, but this and the movie This Is 40 are the only times I can say that I thought she gave a good performance. I think younger kids that don't have as much of a connection with the brand will enjoy it more than older fans. Again, that's only from the limited amount of knowledge I have. But for me, it's a C+. You know, maybe that's being too easy on it, but I had a pretty good time, honestly. Justin, what'd you think of it? You're sort of in between the two of us with your Turtles knowledge, yes?
A little bit. Did grow up with the cartoon to some extent, but wouldn't call myself an expert by any stretch of the word. Similar to earlier summer hit Maleficent, there's a large amount of potential here that just does not get developed. Fortunately, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles doesn't get boring, or arguably sexist, but so much of the story just feels either underdeveloped or, even worse so, swept off to the side. While the origin story is still plenty silly, it's easy to see where and how the filmmakers were trying to give it a darker feel by adding somewhat of a conspiracy element to it. Joe, I know you were mentioned it was a bit of a Amazing Spider-Man ripoff. The difference here being they tried to explore that in this one, and in Amazing Spider-Man, at least the first one anyways, they just basically said, nope, we'll cover it more in the second one. That said, the look of the Turtles feels like something that got rejected from a G.I. Joe movie, particularly during the frenetic action sequences. Dan, I completely agree with you on that. Where, for many of them, it's near impossible to catch everything that's going on due to either lighting with the night sequences or just the camera work in general. Much like the 90s film, I still found the Turtles more annoying than funny, notably in one completely pointless 30-second bit near the end, but there's no denying that a couple jokes did hit throughout the film. Overall, the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles isn't great, but I am curious to see what will be coming next, and I give it a C.
Yeah, that tag scene on the end was just not good.
No.
The one with Will Arnett in his new car, and then the...
Just forced.
Yeah, I didn't care for that. But previous to that, I was having a good time. The Amazing Spider-Man comparison I hadn't thought of, Joe, but that is a pretty good point. I mean...
It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, it kind of is. I didn't think about it at the time. I was thinking more of the Transformers comparison. Maybe that's where the mind goes because of Michael Bay.
Stylistically, it's more Transformers, but the plot is heavily borrowed from Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah, I can totally see that now.
To offer a brief counterpoint to your April O'Neil makes questionable, borderline, dumb decisions.
Go ahead.
I feel like that's also kind of a staple to her character. I mean, you look at movies, cartoons, etc., etc. She does not make a lot of rational decisions, and there have been many people who have said she's one of the worst media portrayals of journalists.
To a certain extent, I think that speaks more to the original 80s cartoon, but classically speaking, you're correct. It doesn't mean that the character has to be that way. I've seen versions of her done better, but your point is valid. Your point is valid. The most base version of her as a cliche, yes, that's more in line with her. Though I'd argue she was still better acted in the cartoon.
I'm not denying that. I'm just making a counterpoint here.
And you know what, Dan? If she was playing a dumb ditz, she did a good job. I'll give you that.
Okay, that's true. Although, per your own thoughts on it, she is an idiot. So maybe she did do all right.
I guess. I mean, I didn't hate her as a person.
Right.
I just think that you probably could have cast someone better, is all I'm saying.
I was a little bit saddened to see that Will Arnett didn't get more to do.
I'm kind of surprised he was in the movie. Like, I didn't think he really had to be.
Yeah, I don't think he had to be either.
I mean, I guess he was having fun, but I don't know.
Much like the rest of the human characters, I'd figure.
I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, he had a much bigger part than Whoopi. I mean, we know Whoopi was in it because she loves the brand.
But she's there and she goes.
She's only in like 2 scenes and she kind of shows up a little bit towards the end. But that's it. Will Arnett's in a fair amount of the movie, and they just don't give him anything funny to do, which is unfortunate.
His dialogue was pretty bad. Like, he didn't have many laughs, unfortunately. Yeah.
I did think the Turtles were kind of funny, though. You thought they were annoying? You kind of always think they're annoying, though,
You don't
right?
really like the Turtles very much, Justin.
This is true. Part of it's due to just random teenage bits. You will be happy to know, this is a bit of a side thing, but I did watch the second one from the 90s.
Revenge of the Ooze.
I thought they were...
Go ahead.
Secret of the Ooze,
Secret of the Ooze, yes.
I thought they were a little bit better portrayed there. They're still kind of having their weird antics, but I thought it flowed better. And this, it's kind of all over the place. We'll have these moments where they're cracking jokes, and some of which are kind of quirky. The random slew of pop culture references bothered me.
That's kind of the way Michelangelo always is, though. To be honest, that's his shtick.
Like, let's be honest, the Batman voice thing is funny now, and in 10 years it won't be.
It'll be dated. That's true. I mean, I don't know. It depends if you're using the Keaton Batman voice. Just kind of lower it a little bit.
that is true.
Hey, Neighbors is dated too, so...
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think that the Turtles were the best part of the movie. I didn't mind the Turtles. I thought
I would
they were
agree.
fine. They got their personalities down. I thought they looked okay. I just think that everything else in the movie pretty much sucked.
How did you guys feel about the PG-13 rating? Because this is notoriously now the first Turtles movie to be PG-13.
Well, I mean, what do you want them to make it R?
No, all of them have been PG.
Well, it's Michael Bay. I mean, they're trying to amp it up, make it cooler for the adults to draw them in, so make it more violent, more explosions, because automatically that makes it better. Right? Is that what you're saying? No, I mean, it's fine. The rating doesn't matter to me. I mean, okay, typically the Turtles are involved, aimed at younger kids, but I mean, teenagers and adults read these comics and stuff too, so it's...
Right.
And you guys might not know this, the original comics were extremely dark and not aimed at kids, so there are multiple angles to look at this. I'm fine with a PG-13 rating, I just want a good quality movie.
Right.
Which I don't think any of us could agree we did not really get.
Well, I think that therein lies the crisis in tone.
Which, I would imagine, might come up in our later review of the older film, is always kind of an issue for the Turtles. What direction to go with them? Where do you find that balance?
Well, yeah, because I feel like, you say you don't care about the PG-13 rating, and obviously parents don't either, because...
Huge money.
Both at the theater that we work at and the show I saw at, when I took my nephew... Was packed with little kids. The girl behind me was probably 4 years old.
I think it speaks to the whole, the critic-proof films. I mean, if it's a big enough franchise with enough attachment, all these people that grew up with these characters are going to bring their kids because they're watching similar stuff now.
Well, and it seems to even get a younger audience than the Transformers movies, and I would imagine because of the current Nickelodeon cartoon.
Which is aimed strictly more at kids.
Right.
Which is very good, by the way.
And that's awesome, but...
honestly...
I don't know. I had a problem with that because I thought that's why there was such a balance...
I know that...
Or an unbalance,
one reason why it probably did so well, even more so than the Turtles' name, is because it's so locked in with the Nickelodeon franchise. They're kind of tying it in. They're marketing it. And the cartoon's been really big. Kind of sort of brought the Turtles back for like the third time on TV.
That's true.
So it really ties in.
Even the trailers, though, were aimed at a kiddie audience.
And it's weird because it's not really a kids movie per se.
It's not. And the only PG-13 trailer I saw was Interstellar. Everything else was like Home and Big Hero 6 and The Penguins of Madagascar, all these little kid movies.
And then you see Turtles, it's like, huh?
Right. Yeah. So even the distributor, I think, didn't know quite what to do with that.
But I also think we kind of live in a very strange time. 90s, 80s, if there was a PG-13 movie, it usually was geared towards an older audience. Now, we have Disney embracing it with Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. We have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which are all generally considered, hey, you can take the whole family to this and you won't have too many objections. But with Turtles, it's a bit of a gray area because, I mean, even with the 90s movies and the cartoons for that matter, parent groups have always been asking themselves, is it too violent? Are they going too far with this? And
sometimes
interesting tidbit, the 90s movie just barely scraped away with a PG rating.
I would believe that.
Yeah, it was pretty
dark.
Especially
back in the day.
I mean, swearing, violence, dark themes.
Yeah.
I believe they had to reshoot a scene to actually get a PG rating.
It's probably true.
But I'll save that for later.
Well, and actually, why don't we segue into that? We always do our triple feature of older movies at the end of the show, but never have we had one that dovetails so nicely with something we're talking about in the new releases. Joe brought the 1990 version of the film to our old classic for the week. So why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Oh, mixing it up a little bit.
Yeah, and continue sort of on the path of,
Turtles.
Talking about both of them together, yeah.
All right, that works. That way we kind of are still fresh in our minds.
Yeah.
I guess I'll lead into my review then. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1990 is the first film adaptation of the TMNT franchise directed by Steve Barron. As a crime wave sweeps across New York, led by the ninja group the Foot Clan, the Turtles decide it is time to rise up and stop them. Together with their leader Splinter and new allies April O'Neil and Casey Jones, they take on the Foot and their leader the Shredder. This film is actually a fairly faithful adaptation to the original comics, keeping a rather dark tone sprinkled with more upbeat comedy of the 1980s TV series. The Turtles are enjoyable, as are the supporting characters, and work well, including the villain Shredder. The plot is simple but solid enough, and the film knows what it is and has fun with itself. The soundtrack balances the pop tracks of the 80s with darker tones for more intense scenes. The Turtles themselves look great, and the fight choreography isn't too bad either. I will admit some of the humor does fall flat at times, and the climax of the film is really underwhelming. Still, for fans, this is the best adaptation of the franchise on film that we have gotten so far, and an overall fun experience, and I give it a B.
And I think part of the reason you ran that is because I had never seen anything, and you wanted me to sort of have some sort of knowledge going into the new one to have something to compare it to. I think it was the general consensus just from the trailers that the new one was going to pale in comparison to some of the original
and
things.
It's pretty hated.
It is not liked, yes, that's true. But, so I'm glad that I know now, what the original fans of the series were so hype about when these movies would come out every couple of years.
And that was really at the height of the original, and I guess biggest time for the fans for Turtles.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a fun movie. It's got a legitimately good story. I think the voice acting is a little bit corny. It's hard to take some of the more dramatic scenes seriously with the tone of the rest of the film, as we sort of talked about with, the franchise always sort of having that problem. But I definitely did enjoy it. Other than the soundtrack and some dated references, I think it holds up really well. And I think you could show this to a kid now. And, I don't know if he would like it over the new one. It's hard to say, I guess, what a kid would think. But if he had no knowledge of the Turtles either, you could show them this from 25 years ago almost, and I think they would enjoy it. So it gets a B from me as well.
The reason I really ran the film is because as much as I've run it over the time, I always thought that over time would get old for me as a kid because I loved it growing up. But it's a movie that just still holds up really well for me, and I enjoy it just as much.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get old for me.
I would definitely agree with that. As somebody who's never seen it before and seeing it as a grown man for the first time, I thought it was a good time. I thought it was fun.
Good.
Justin, what do you think of the 1990 version?
The 90s version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, on my second viewing, strikes me in a similar way like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Yes, it's perfectly easy to sit down and watch it alone, but it's a film that's really meant to be seen in a crowd. And that's part of the reason why a second opinion made a relatively decent impact on my overall grade. Granted, the film's horribly dated, and sometimes resembles a tacky 80s action film made in the 90s, but if able to look past that, and suspend disbelief immensely, there's some definite fun to be had with a variety of entertaining appearances to find, such as an early Sam Rockwell.
No, it's true.
Though where the film truly shines is from a technical standpoint, particularly in the use of state-of-the-art puppetry techniques. Unfortunately, my biggest issue with the story is not necessarily from a narrative standpoint, but in the fact that, much like with the new version, the Turtles themselves are often more annoying than funny. Admittedly, they do have their moments, but more often than not, I felt like the supporting cast truly managed to steal the show the majority of the time, such as with Elias Koteas as Casey Jones. As I mentioned, it may very well be dated, and it's definitely not going to be for everyone, but for those looking for some decent escapism to share with the family, there's some fun to be had with the original 90s film, and I give it a C+.
Boy, I just don't think it's that dated.
Some of the 80s
soundtrack.
music.
Yeah, the soundtrack for me is the biggest sticking point.
Yeah, that sticks out. Some of the hairstyles, maybe.
Some of the references here and there.
But I think it's pretty good.
But, it's no more dated than, the Goonies. Or there's a lot of 80s movies that kids watch for the first time today and still fall in love with.
Actually, there's one thing that did bother me. We didn't mention the original review for the new film. One thing that bothered me, just in general, is that I love Splinter. And in the new film, he was horrible. He looked horrible. He was not the character.
He did look bad.
That definitely impacted it. They got his character wrong, and he looked terrible. So, and then he's really inconsistent because in the movie he really has no time defeating Shredder, and then all of a sudden, reverse that.
Which kind of bugged me because the first, I want to say 2 minutes where they're doing the comic book thing to open up the movie.
Yeah,
I wanted more of that, and then
that was a cool style.
And then they actually introduce him, and the way his appearance is terrible. I was kind of okay with the fact that they tied him into April's own storyline.
Whatever.
But
I
will give you.
I liked Splinter so much. I think he's one of the best parts of the original film, and I also thought he really really worked well with the overall theme of the film, which is about family and fatherhood, which I think is pretty consistent, has multiple storylines. You have the Splinter and the Turtles, you've got Splinter's backstory, you've got April O'Neil and her father. There's a lot of good things. You've got the kid who's the thief. There was a unifying theme that adds narratively with the story. And the new one, I feel like there's less of a unity. And I think Splinter was kind of a big component for that. And Shredder. And I mean, I think if you get it's kind of like messing up. Okay, to give you an example, it's kind of like doing a Batman film where you completely ruin Alfred and the Joker. It's kind of big.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I did get the sense that if, just from watching these two movies, because obviously they are very different origin stories and
but if you think about it, the same plot's very similar, though.
It is, but I feel like, if you really are into the mythos of the Turtles, I feel like that might be a big sticking point for people because of the differences.
I will say, yes, I do feel like they do betray some things here, with the possible exception of the Turtles themselves. But I do think if you're not super familiar with the Turtles, is this the worst introduction ever? I still think everything else is better, but it might not be the worst thing. I don't know. Like I said, if you're a really little kid, you might get something out of it. But once again, I'm not sure you should show this to little kids.
Right. I don't think so either. I mean, I was really shocked at how many little kids were in this theater. And, I mean, they seemed to be enjoying it. It didn't seem to be, too scary for them or anything, but...
They're desensitized to this.
I guess so, and that's kind of a bummer.
In an age of things like Transformers and all the other super violent things out there, I mean,
look,
can you blame them?
Just as the kind of capstone to this, really, it's not as bad as the Transformers movies.
No.
But then again...
It's not. It's not as violent.
But once again, Bay did not direct it.
Right.
Officially, at least.
Yeah, he definitely has his
you can tell.
a heavy hand.
You can tell because it has a lot of the same issues.
Right.
I just think this film is ugly. I'm sorry. I just think stylistically it looks ugly. I don't like looking at the CGI. They're almost as ugly as the Transformers for me. Just visually.
It's a shame.
I don't think they look good.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't know how you can fix that. I just did not like the designs.
All right, well, with that, let's move on to our second film in the new release section of our show, and that is The 100-Foot Journey. Helen Mirren is Madame Mallory, the proprietor of one of the fanciest restaurants in France, when an Indian family, driven from their home, sets up camp right across the street and opens up their own restaurant featuring typical Indian cuisine and threatening Madame's livelihood. Manish Dayal is Hassan Haji, the family's star chef, whom Madame tries to lure away to give her restaurant a second prestigious Michelin star. Om Puri plays Papa Haji, and Charlotte Laban is Marguerite, one of Madame's employees, an aspiring chef in her own right, who initially finds the Hajis on the side of the road and takes them in. This is a star-studded affair behind the scenes, with Steven Spielberg and Oprah Winfrey producing, and Lasse Hallström of Chocolat, What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and Cider House Rules fame directs. The 100-Foot Journey is shot well and scored nicely by A.R. Rahman. I just wish the movie on the whole was as delectable as some of the dishes being made in the film. Mirren does a great job, of course, but her character seems a bit confused as she continually flip-flops throughout the first half of the film. The montage scenes between her and Papa at war with each other are bland and unfunny. The core of the film, though, Hassan taking Madame's course, and his relationship with Marguerite are where Journey is the most focused, and they are some of the best scenes, and did make the film enjoyable, so I give it a B.
Oh, wow.
Justin, what did you think of The 100-Foot Journey?
Hallström as a director has always struck me as the master of melodrama. Granted, it's a varied component in all of his films, the worst cases being Safe Haven and Dear John, but The 100-Foot Journey is by no means an exception to the rule. This isn't necessarily due to the storyline, but rather Hallström's own decision to turn the conflicts of the film into these cartoonish ploys that feel wildly out of place from the actual storyline. The best of these happen with some degree of subtlety, placing believable scenarios such as your rival stealing all your food, and trying to figure out how to deal with it if it's at all possible. Though what sets the film apart from other culture clash films, such as earlier this year's $1 Million Arm, is from the fact that clearly Hallström respects both cultures. Even when Mirren's character appears despicable, the audience can take note of how she respects her enemy and won't let them get beaten down easily. These moments are hands down the best scenes in the whole film, but unfortunately the bulk of them occur during the second act, with an extremely rushed and poorly written third act depicting success still to come. While I don't have any issue with seeing the inevitable rise to fame, that it happens to focus on it for a good 20 minutes and then we never see it again bothers me. Although the 100-Foot Journey is a sap-filled one, it's also got some warm heart and some decent performances to get it by, and I give it a B.
Joe, what did you think of the 100-Foot Journey?
Overall, I thought that the narrative itself, the actual story, had some really strong dramatic content. Admittedly, it's kind of been done before. I mean, obviously, directed Chocolat. It's kind of
Yeah.
very, very similar story.
That is true.
As you guys could put it, it is kind of fluffy and sappy, and it does get repetitive in certain points, but it is still beautifully shot. The music is great. I really did like Mirren and the fathers back and forth. I thought they had some good comedic scenes. I think they were the highlight of the movie.
I liked their back and forth at the end of the film.
Like, well, their
when they
dialogue.
were sparring, I didn't care for it.
I liked their conversations.
Okay.
Like, I thought the way
That's fair, yep.
And I don't think Mirren's character was confused as so much as she developed. She was conflicted. Yeah. That's why she flip-flopped. So I think that's the way she was written, Dan. I mean,
pretty quick turnaround, though.
Which speaks to the rushed aspect.
Yeah.
No, but the core story, I think, with the main character and his journey, his passion, I felt, while it was still kind of warm and fuzzy, it still felt genuine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the core that made it interesting for me. I thought the movie made me hungry. I mean, the food looked really good.
Yes, it did.
And I liked the way the story was going. The romance was okay. That character kind of annoyed me, that their rivalry, their non-rivalry, don't know exactly what was going on. It's never really
flip-flopping.
Yeah, once again, never clearly established. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna help you. Now I'm kind of jealous, but you gave him all those books and told him all the hints. What do you think was gonna happen? Guy's a great chef, so I don't know. That didn't quite work for me.
Well, I think she didn't realize he was so good, but at the time,
it's hard to say.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
Obviously, she went out of her way, but maybe she's a nice person. I don't know. Ultimately, though, I think the problem with me is I could get past the fluffiness and everything, but kind of leading with where Justin went, that extended third act. I mean, the movie was like 20 minutes too long. Mm-hmm. The story went a completely different direction. It was getting super serious and dramatic, and it seemed like it was, I don't know, go even to a more complex direction, but then it ends and resolves quickly, and I'm just like, well, that was pointless. You could have just cut that out of the movie.
Yeah.
So I give it a little lower than you guys. I give it a B-. If it had just been a little bit shorter, cut that unnecessary part out, it would have been fine. Probably would have gotten a B too, but B- is where I sit with that one.
Okay, and I think that's a fair grade. I actually struggled between the two grades myself, just because of that sort of rushed nature of it and the characters themselves. But I don't know. I mean, I left it with a pretty good feeling. It was a bit long, but I don't know. I would have preferred if they trimmed out some of those comedy scenes. You know, for me, the drama. And the romance in the last half of the film, the romance on both aspects, the younger romance and the older romance.
The romance stories and the overall drama, the main story, so to speak, I think was the strongest point. And you say you'd like to cut the comedy out. I see where you're coming from, but then again, the audience I was with laughed every moment. So, not sure if that would have been the best move.
Okay.
It felt like watching a bad farce. It's
what? Expand on that.
Well, it's like, okay, yes, they're bickering like an old couple, but
you know it's not real.
But you know it's not real. It doesn't seem believable when they're having these moments like I mentioned with the stealing food bit. It's cool because you can totally see it happening. You can totally get into the scenario, feel the tenacity of trying to survive in a struggling business, and it works in those really small doses. And I wish Hallstrom had done more of that instead of these little cheap ploys for comedy. I feel like if you had taken out that, you had knocked out a good portion of the third act where, I mean, yes, seeing success at long last is nice. It doesn't really work. It doesn't take you anywhere.
Yeah, it didn't go anywhere.
And it resolves so quickly that's like,
you might as well take it out of the film.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, you could easily cut this movie down to an hour 40, an hour 35, and you would have a tremendously stronger project.
Yeah, it'd be much tighter.
It's like they kind of wanted to make another movie halfway along and then just had to drop it because they already filmed so much of it.
The 200-foot journey.
Maybe there's a sequel on that.
50-foot journey.
Were you guys affected at all by the whole thing with the Michelin stars? Because from me, like, I guess foodies know what that is. I never heard of Michelin stars, and they don't get explained until, like, the very end of the movie. I mean, when one of Hassan's siblings says, like, hey, what's so important about these Michelin stars anyway? And then he tells them.
Well, I mean, obviously.
There's that one bit where Marguerite kind of, like, gives a brief synopsis, but...
A little bit. I mean, I got the point of it, but, like, I don't know.
As critics, we know what it means.
Yeah. Well, no. Well, I mean, yeah, I know what stars means.
Though I think that 3 stars is pretty limiting. So that means that everybody gets 1 star.
That's what I didn't
and then
understand.
It's like a second star is great, and then a 3rd star you never get because it's freaking amazing. I'm like, so it's a very limited range of reviewing, isn't it?
And then they get stars based on the chef at the time, it seemed like.
Oh, like
she hired him so he would get her a 2nd star, but then he left.
And he was so good.
And yet the restaurant still has 2 stars. I didn't understand how it worked.
I mean, I guess it depends on the best staff and if they're making up their own dishes.
Guess.
But
I didn't really understand like the whole star rating system. I understood how important it was.
I think that's a foodie thing.
But it must be. So it was, for me, it was completely over my head. But
I'm just sorry. Who cares what these guys think? I mean, obviously you got good food. You're the best,
the
best place in the country.
Dignitaries are eating there.
The minister,
you're already,
the minister of France.
You're already a respectable restaurant.
Yeah.
Who cares if you get it just seems superfluous.
Well, and that's why I don't know. Her character was a little bit flighty to me. I feel like.
Well.
All right. Well, moving on, we've got Into the Storm, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
In the town of Silverton on graduation day, the vice principal sends his 2 sons, Donnie, played by Max Deacon, and Trey, played by Nathan Kress, on an assignment to capture footage for a time capsule depicting testimonies of the various graduates on where they hope to be in the next 25 years. However, when Trey convinces Donnie to finally talk to his crush, played by Alicia Debnam Carey, who desperately needs footage of her own to get an internship, the 2 leave and end up trapped beneath the debris in the middle of a deadly storm, with their only hope coming from a team of tornado chasers and their researcher, named Allison, played by The Walking Dead's Sarah Wayne Callis, trying to predict where it may be heading next to save lives before it's too late. Into the Storm's probably going to be the film this year that makes everyone wonder how on earth this got past the direct-to-DVD lineup. It's blatantly obvious that the filmmakers were trying to emulate disaster films like Twister in an effort to hold their own, but the end result is completely and utterly pitiful. To start, the visual effects are, for lack of a better word, unimpressive, bordering on Sci-Fi Channel laughable at times. The found footage motif is an interesting setup to a cheap and quasi-familiar filmmaking technique nowadays, but much like those, at their worst, it ends up feeling shaky, and more often than not, cheap. Aside from these setbacks, none of the characters are particularly interesting, and most of them are largely stereotypes of small-town city life, from the hillbilly-like comic relief characters who had just about nothing to the story, to the boring and uninteresting family dealing with the circumstances the best they can from 2 separate locations. None of it has any real feeling of authenticity to it, and the delivery of the dialogue is mediocre at best. Honestly, I can't say Into the Storm was the worst watch I've seen this summer, but it's certainly up there, and I give it an F.
Wow. All right. Joe, what do you think of Into the Storm?
The message is good, the characters are mostly likable, if not extremely cliche, and the acting is okay, and the effects are actually kind of awesome. I actually didn't think they were sci-fi level quality. And I think that overall, even though Twister is probably a better film, I have to say there's one thing about it that's definitely smarter. In Twister, they were trying to run into the tornado. At least these guys were trying to run away. I will admit, it's still pretty dumb and more enjoyable with a group to bash it with for its silliness. I did see it with a group of people and was making fun of it the whole time, so I will admit that probably affected my grade. Overall, though, I think it's a fun but fairly forgettable film, and I give it a C.
Wow, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Failure and an average? Well, I am exactly in between you guys.
Nice.
I'd say probably the biggest problem with the film is it's an effects-driven piece where nothing really happens for almost a third of the movie, leaving it to start out as a character piece, and most of the characters are either poorly written, or unlikable, or generic, or all 3. Once the tornadoes do start, it becomes at least a little more engaging, and certainly much more visually appealing, but it's still hard to care when there's virtually no attachment to any of the characters. I will admit there was one emotionally charged scene with the son trapped under the building, but that was the best human element the film had to offer. The quote-unquote comic relief was utterly annoying and useless, as Justin said.
Hey, dude, my arm hairs?
Ugh, terrible. Terrible. Lift him out of the movie completely and it doesn't change the story at all.
I don't want to spoil anything, but you'll be pretty mad if you dislike those characters.
Yeah, that's true. The whole movie comes across as an unwanted stepchild of Twister, I never really liked Twister that much to begin with, largely because of the stupidity of the people.
I'm sorry, there's the people in that movie might be better actors, but they're dumber than the people in this movie.
I absolutely agree. So for me, Into the Storm is a D+. I do definitely see the sci-fi elements. Like, I feel like if sci-fi...
It's so awesome.
...didn't start going with, like, the Sharknadoes and the Terracudas and stuck with, like, quote-unquote...
believable?
You know, like, believable pieces, I feel like you would have something like this.
It does seem like a sci-fi. I thought the special effects...
I don't consider that a good thing.
It depends on how you look at it.
I am not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying that's what I felt about it.
No, I could see the sci-fi. I thought the special effects were better than a lot of sci-fi movies I've seen. So
did you like the Fire NATO?
Yes. That part was amazing.
Was so stupid.
That was amazing. He gets sucked up. Spoilers. He gets sucked... Okay, the guy, they clearly say, okay... You know he's going to die because they make it seem like he has to live. So he's like, spoilers, just about the only guy.
They only said to him about 5 times in the previous 2 scenes, yo, everything's going to be fine.
So you know.
Cliche-wise,
this kid's got to die. And he gets like the worst death because he gets sucked into a tornado, like right as this thing explodes when it hits a tank. He's set on fire, and as he's burning, he goes up into a burning tornado.
I can't.
It was hilarious.
It was so terrible.
It was hilarious. So I'm saying it's terrible, but in the right mood, this could be an awesome movie. So don't let these guys take you down too much. This could be a good time. Get some alcohol.
I would agree.
This is good.
I do agree that this movie would definitely be better seen with a group. I saw it by myself. Justin saw it by himself.
Yep. No, Into the Storm. It's roast worthy. This is a good time.
No question. I would rip this to pieces.
There's a potential good time to be had here. That's all I'm saying.
But I'm not denying.
But it's
an
not
abysmal
in
movie.
Watching it. Straight.
But I'll put it this way: it's definitely enjoyable.
Yeah.
But it's not as enjoyable as Piano Man.
Grand Piano. Mm-hmm. Grand Piano was amazing for its awfulness,
but it was technically better.
Well, the characters were at least better in that. I thought the characters here were terrible. I will admit, yes, they made better decisions for the most part.
I'm just saying their overall goal was to live, not to die.
Yes, I agree, and that's why I hate Twister.
That was so big, too.
It really was, and I gave it probably... I mean, I wasn't grading, obviously, back then, but I would say it was probably around the same. It's probably like a C-. I really don't like Twister. So this, at least, they're smarter, but they just... You can't get behind any of them because who cares? I didn't care if the whole town did die.
That's pretty bad.
I feel like that's not what you want in a disaster film.
That's kind of a big problem, yes.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a problem.
Just a small portion.
I mean, it's like, watching Armageddon and rooting for the meteor. It's not what you want out of a disaster movie. Justin, I know it's bad, but I am a little surprised, I guess, by the F. I thought maybe a D.
Yeah, D sounds more right to me.
But I'm okay with the F because it is pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But, all right, well, we don't need to talk about Into the Storm anymore.
Nah, it's pretty bad.
Let's move on to A Most Wanted Man, and Joe's going to have that one.
A Most Wanted Man is an espionage thriller film directed by Anton Corbijn and stars the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, the late great one, actually, Rachel McAdams of The Notebook and About Time, and one of my personal favorites, Willem Dafoe. Hoffman plays Gunther Bachmann, the leader of an anti-terrorist agency. In an attempt to uncover a possible terrorist front, Gunther enlists the help of a banker named Tommy Brew, played by Dafoe, and a social worker named Annabelle Richter, played by McAdams, in using a fugitive to ensnare a possible terrorist supporter. The fugitive, Isa Karpov, inherited money from his crime boss father and seeks asylum in Germany. The tension comes as everyone is trying to prevent an attack while towing the line on what is morally right. This film is a very logical response to the post-war on terror era, as the events of the early 2000s are a time of reflection now. While we think that there aren't extreme elements of fears here, the truth is that they are either subdued or just accepted nowadays. The film has an extremely realistic atmosphere and doesn't bombard you with clever editing or cinematography, but it's simple and somber, with characters being believable and the subject matter of an angle of anti-terrorism most people probably don't think about. It's a very real spy movie, not overly Hollywoodized. Though I applaud the film for this, it may leave some viewers feeling unentertained and by the end frustrated or just depressed. However, I do think that's actually kind of the point. Nevertheless, I do think the film has some pacing issues, as it sticks to its formula with a little too much rigidity. The characters are also well established, but more time could have been spent on getting to know them even more. I also felt that the acting was good, but not the best I've seen from Hoffman. It's a well-made film, but I'm certain that it's not for everyone, and I give it a B+.
All right. Justin, a most wanted man.
The works of John Le Carré were written several decades ago, but it's impressive how easily they lend themselves to modernized adaptations, still hitting home the themes of paranoia and questionable ethics. In contrast of so many spy thrillers in the present, Most Wanted Man builds its intensity slowly, but for a 2-hour running time never seems to drag or lose interest with its characters. Unfortunately, not all the cast is as stellar as the storytelling. While Hoffman continues to show how much range he has with acting, particularly with accents, Rachel McAdams' constantly cracking German accent becomes a bit of a problem as the film goes on. It all boils up to a climax that unfolds in a rather abrupt 2 minutes, and just as it seems like it's about to go even deeper into the narrative, which is something I absolutely would have loved to have seen, it decides to stop. Although I did thoroughly enjoy the bulk of A Most Wanted Man for its thoroughly engaging storyline and characters, the letdown ending pulls down a promising B+, or even A- for that matter, to a B-.
Well, this is the latest reminder that Hoffman has left us far too soon, because he doesn't look particularly well here. You can see he's a bit bloated, but yet he's still far and away the most engaging part of this film.
Yep.
A Most Wanted Man itself is a decent puzzler of a thriller with some good twists and some questionable accents. Justin mentioned notably from Rachel McAdams, who is woefully miscast here. I like her a lot, but this was not the role for her or the accent. It's a little hard to completely follow, a bit slow in parts, and perhaps doesn't get all explained out until the last maybe 15 minutes, but it is worth the wait when it's all said and done. I doubt it's going to give Hoffman a posthumous nomination or anything, but even I have to admit, I'm sure he'd be happy to know that this was his final starring role and not the much more average God's Pocket. I give A Most Wanted Man a B.
At the very least, it's better than certain final films like Brick Mansions.
This is
yes,
true.
Yes, that is true. Paul Walker's final was Brick Mansions, which is
not great.
An embarrassment. But to be fair, I wouldn't say any of his movies are
on the level of Hoffman.
Top-notch Hoffman type acting. But yeah, I thought he really was, acting-wise, the best part in this. I do agree. Even Willem Dafoe maybe was a little bit off.
You think he was supposed to be American?
I guess.
His name was Tommy Crew, so...
Right. But the accent
he had
was
kind of an
like
accent.
Not... Yeah, there was a big accent problem in this movie.
I even felt like Hoffman had a little bit of it too. Like, I wasn't entirely sure what the accent was. Like, it wasn't really German. It was more like Dutch-ish?
Russian. And it seemed like there was a lot of like German-Russian overlap, and I didn't quite know who was German and who was Russian.
Because I'm pretty sure there were some people that were... Like, it took me a while to figure out the character Issa was actually Russian. I thought he might have been Muslim because he was Muslim, so I thought he was Arabic.
That's what
but
I
he was
thought
actually,
too, actually.
He was actually a Russian one. You're like, Issa Korpov. Okay,
right.
He's like from Czechoslovakia or something.
Right.
Like,
Ukraine or something.
So, like, I don't know. The accents... There was some weird directing with that because it was like... I know it takes place in Germany, but... I'm not convinced any of these accents were German.
No.
I don't know.
I agree. I think Hoffman's probably sounded the most German, but again, also kind of Russian.
Kind of weird. Like,
yeah.
It didn't quite... And sometimes it sounded like you could tell he sounded almost American sometimes. Like, it wasn't the best accent I've heard him do. Honestly.
No, he's definitely given better performances, done better accents, but he definitely shines here. And I do agree, Joe, that a little bit more on each of the main characters, would have, I think, helped a bit. Because it was a little bit of a struggle to try and follow everything that was happening.
Because, like, they gave you what was happening, but they didn't give you many of the details, so it was like, okay, we know what's going on, we still don't know exactly why.
Right. Which I guess is what they wanted. I don't think it personally worked.
It would have been a stronger film if they had given us a little more time with everything. Like, the ending, I think it wasn't done intentionally that way, but I still think...
it still feels bittersweet.
It's bittersweet, and I mean... But once again, I have a strong feeling that's the whole movie. It's supposed to be bittersweet and kind of...
I agree.
That's what they're going for.
And I'm with you, Joe, but I feel like there's still a better way to do that. Be it with more character development. I mean, in contrast of your take on the storyline, Dan, this is a spy story. Certain people only know so much, so it doesn't really surprise me that the director chose to only divulge information per certain character.
No, that's true. That's a fair point.
No, if they would expanded a little more, would have been fine. But the way it ended, I'm not sure if I think that everybody's going to like the ending, or even if I liked it. But I appreciated what they were going for. That's why I think it sort of works.
Yeah, I don't know if I really liked it either.
Like, but I know
it sort of worked
in the sense of the movie.
Yeah, in the context of the rest of the movie.
Because the movie's not supposed to make you feel good. You're supposed to kind of feel bad about how things resolve. And
right.
Sometimes you don't get answers. Sometimes life just goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And rather abruptly. So, like I said, gets a high grade because I think that they succeeded in what they were trying to do for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I can't fault you for that. I mean, I think we're all sort of in that same range. You know, different shades of B.
Yeah, really every different shade. Yeah,
I guess so.
50 Shades of B.
Probably a better movie, actually. Seinfeld, the sequel.
Oh, B movie.
Yeah.
Yes, love it. Let's move on to our home media moment, and that is The Missing Picture. Justin has that.
From 1975 to 1979, director Rithi Pan lived in Cambodia, witnessing the horrific atrocities committed by the Khmer Rouge. Now, only relying on his memories of his time there, Pan uses miniatures and clay figurines to dramatize the events as they occurred and bring his audience into understanding why these events have haunted him for so long. The Missing Picture poses a big question. How do we as people cope with tragedy locked deep inside ourselves? Pan bravely answers that question with solid storytelling and impressively detailed sets that make use of as much footage as Pan has at his disposal. The story is a hard watch, even being told through miniatures, but honestly, that's what truly makes this film as a whole as good as it is. These figurines help literally set the stage and give the right feeling of desperation and depression. It's every bit as beautiful as it is shocking and disturbing, ultimately showing off cinema as an art form. If I have only one regret about this film, and it's a very minor one at that, it's simply wishing that Pan had tracked down other people for testimonies, or at least their overall reactions to the matter itself. Given the subject matter and theme, I can forgive that he didn't, but like I said, I still feel like it would have given it a bit more authenticity since we're only seeing it from the eyes of one person.
True.
Overall, The Missing Picture is a fascinating and powerful documentary, well worth checking out, and I give it an A.
There seems to be like an infinite number of creative ways for someone to tell their story, and we'll hear about another one later with American Splendor. But The Missing Picture finds one of the most creative yet with these figurines. The juxtaposition between these delicate, sometimes cute little creatures and the subject matter of the film should not be lost on the viewer because it only serves to punctuate the message more. The long-lost footage, the figurines, and the story itself combine to make a revealing and at times, as Justin said, horrifying tale. At one point, the narrator says of a long-forgotten cameraman who captured some of the original film used, "His body disappears, his story disappears, but not his footage." And with The Missing Picture, now we can say that at least Pan's story survives as well. I give it an A-. Really, largely, Justin, due to what you said. I mean, I would have liked to have seen it from more than just the eyes of one person. Mm-hmm. How many others
would be alive
would there be
willing to talk about
I'm
it? I'm
sure maybe a couple. I don't know. It's a good question.
Well, it's not, kind of the darkest time in Cambodia. So
yeah, it is.
I don't know, honestly.
That's true. What did you think of The Missing Picture, Joe?
Well, The Missing Picture, I think, has really good dramatic content. And I think the thing that really strikes me about this film is, kind of along with what you guys said, is just, if you just think about the amount of effort he put into every single one of these models,
oh my gosh,
all these different sets, to bring forth this story in a completely creative way, just thinking about the time and dedication, as well as the fact that he's thinking about all these events and putting that into these figurines, how hard that must be for him, but at the same time how beautiful it is, how picturesque and how darkly tragic the whole story is. It's also really interesting from a historical perspective. I thought the intercut between the footage and the models was great. I also thought he had a really good voice for narration too. I thought that it wasn't overbearing. It didn't really get too bombarding.
Well, you watched it on Instant, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's not his voice. That's the English version of whoever the narrator was.
Even so, the narration for the film just worked really well, even in the translation. Whoever they got to do that, it worked really well. It was seamless. It was kind of had this seemingly hypnotic effect, and I liked the genuine cultural music of the time and the era. I just thought it did a really good job of creating this atmosphere to really bring you to that time. The only thing that kind of held it down for me is kind of ironic. As much as I liked it, I felt that it got kind of repetitive. Like, we kept seeing kind of the same basic thing. It was like, we'll talk about this story, we'll show how horrific it is, we'll have him reflect, we'll show some of the models, then the cuts, the footage, and then we'll do the same thing again. Sometimes it'll be chronological, sometimes it won't be. It's more like random stories, that's fine. but I felt like he could have mixed it up a little bit somehow. Maybe other interviews would have helped mix it up. Other than that, I thought it was really excellent. Amazing creativity. Definitely want to check out, and I give it an A- as well.
Yeah, that narrator really had like a lilting sort of voice. It was calming when you're seeing all these horrific images.
And he also had that slight accent, so I guess it really convinced me in thinking it was him.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that worked. So good voice acting, narration, whatever you call it.
That is true. And yet you make a good point about all of the fine detail in these little figurines.
Like, just think about
the painstaking nature of that. I feel like maybe that it was super, super cathartic for him to do this, and that's why he started doing the figurines. He found this hobby that was maybe calming. It seems like a very calming hobby. Yeah, like therapeutic kind of hobby.
And you could tell the amount of detail it puts into it, and a large amount of these sets, and how he kind of had it modeled after every scene. Obviously, planning the documentary out. This must have taken him years.
Oh, I'm sure.
And it's also kind of sad and tragic and disturbing when you think about it. Like, this guy making little dolls to help represent that. There's an element about that's a little disturbing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think it just kind of shows... It certainly fits with the tone of the film.
I would agree with that.
It's like him trying to reach back to that childhood, which he found was lost, which he keeps citing in the film.
Yeah, that was a point he hit home a few times. What a creative outlet for a film. If
it makes you feel any better, a couple of Pol Pot's assistants have been finally found guilty of hate crimes. So
really?
Happened very recently, so I thought that was very fitting.
Oh, that is very fitting.
If anybody saw it and was moved by that, there's some good news for you.
Yeah, because, God, what a tragedy.
No question.
Yeah. It's nice that we have movies like this to make people aware of, because this all happened before any of us were born.
That's true. And the thing is, some people might not be up on history or just the news, politics, but a film can be a creative outlet to get people more interested in these things in other ways.
Absolutely.
Make them aware of what's going on.
And especially something like this where it isn't just like, news footage or... here's Walter Cronkite reporting on this. This is really this found footage. I thought the scene with him picking up the film canister and sort of like picking apart the film itself was really cool. Mm-hmm. To know that this was all, not all of it, some of it was stock footage, but a lot of it was this real footage from the time.
And how that fuses so perfectly with his own miniatures and figurines and things like that.
Yeah.
Glad you guys enjoyed it. Was definitely curious to see where we were all going to stand on this one.
It's definitely one of our better HMMs.
I was just going to say it's the best one we've had in quite a while. Better than Cold Comes the Night even.
Wow. Well, that good. Once again, accents.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that is sort of a recurring theme, the accents today. All right, well, hopefully not too many accents here because our top 5 is all about films called American, with that word somewhere in the title. We've never done like a title-based top 5, but we had a whole string of them for our Oscar A to Z, and we just wrapped it up with this week's American Splendor. So I thought we'd take a look at the best movies with the word America in the title. I'll start this one out this week. And my honorable mention goes to Borat. I couldn't put it on the list because really most people just know it as Borat. But of course, the full name is Borat Cultural Learnings of America for Make Benefit Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan.
That is true.
So it does have it in the title, but of course no one actually calls it that. They just call it Borat.
Good one. I didn't think about that. Good one.
Classic movie.
Classic.
I think we would all agree. Classic comedy. All right. Well, my number 5 is An American Crime. This is a movie starring Ellen Page. And after Juno was given an A+ by me, I had never seen her before, so I sort of sought out some of her other works, and An American Crime was one of them that came over. And it is really, really intense and unflinching. Have either of you seen the movie?
I have not.
Okay, well, real quick, basically what happens is she gets... her parents leave her with this other family, and they go run off with the circus, or traveling carnival or something, and based on a true story. And this new family she's a part of, the mother is, basically Flowers in the Attic times 3.
Oh, wow.
And she chains her up to the basement and the radiator and doesn't feed her, and it is super intense. And to to know that it was a real story is horrifying. But Ellen Page was really, really good in it. So hopefully maybe I'll run that sometime. My number 4 is American History X. We just spoke about this on the show a couple of weeks ago as part of our Oscar A to Z, so don't need to go into too much detail about that, but of course, great Ed Norton performance. Number 3 is American Pie, the first one, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Love that pie, just like Jason Biggs did.
Wow.
Really just such a great movie. At the time it came out, I was just in that age range. I was a little bit older, I guess. I was just out of college, but super fun. It's a shame that more of the actors in that didn't go on to bigger and better things. We'll see them pop up every now and then, but
it's surprising. Jason Biggs,
Yeah, Jason Biggs. He's in Orange is the New Black a little bit right now, but he's probably other than Allison Hannigan, he's probably the most successful one, and he doesn't really do that much, God bless him.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. All right, well, my number 2 is Coming to America. One of my all-time childhood faves. Eddie Murphy, probably his best movie, I would say. I mean, he has many, many good ones, so I wouldn't be upset if somebody said a different one, but for my money, Coming to America is just an all-time comedy classic, one of the most quotable movies of all time. Joe, let's go to you next for the top 5.
I'm going to start off with an honorable mention, and I didn't quite make it to the list, but I think American Werewolf in London is kind of this great... Yes, Justin's laughing. Because I think it's a great kind of homage to horror, but it also kind of balances with dark comedy.
Yes.
Has some really great practical effects, too. So, if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's worth a watch. Number 5 for me is actually American Tail. It's the first animated feature with Don Bluth featuring Fievel, and I think that if there is a story kind of focusing on the idea of immigration and just the struggle, honestly, of immigrants in America, as well as the American dream, and just some great animation and music, got to check it out. It's one of Don Bluth's best.
Haven't seen that one since I was a kid, but that is a strong choice.
Same.
Yeah, good movie.
Hold up. I actually do like the second one better.
I've heard that from a few people,
I
actually.
think when I saw them both, I did prefer the sequel, actually.
I do prefer it better, but I think that in some ways it's a stronger film.
Okay.
But in terms of America, it's definitely up there.
That is true.
Number 4 for me is actually going to be American Pie. I did not enjoy the pie quite the same way as Jason Biggs did, or Dan apparently. But this movie is funny. I mean, I kind of like the whole franchise. Might even like the second one more. I'm not sure, but the first 2 are pretty close for me, and I'd say outside with the first one here. My number 3 is Coming to America. Well, it's one of my favorite movies. It's hilarious, and Dan pretty much said it. It's probably Eddie Murphy's best movie.
In your top 25 of all time?
Correct. Right up there with Twins, It's one of
all the late 80s comedy greats.
Yeah, just for some reason I kind of drawn to those ones. And my number 2 is American History X. We talked about it recently. Great Edward Norton performance, great movie. You know what's going on.
All right, Justin, how about for you, the America movies?
All right. Well, Joe, thank you for making sure that I'm not going completely nutty, because my honorable mention is also An American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I've never seen this movie.
Classic, man. I think you'd love it. You'd dig it.
I probably would.
It's fantastic. Unfortunately, because it's entirely set in London, I'm not sure if it'd be
the most American
appropriate
movie
for this list, but great fun. For anyone who hasn't seen it, please watch it. It needs to be seen. It's probably one of the best cult movies out there. Number 5, I'm sure will make Dan happy, and that is American Hustle.
Of course it does.
Just a well-crafted heist movie, great performances, and as Bale put it so brilliantly, the art of survival is a story that never ends. My number 4 is one that will make Joe and Dan very unhappy, and that is American Gangster. It really...
Okay,
sorry, good.
That wasn't even on my short list. I had like 15 movies on my short list.
It's kind of funny. I was thinking, if there's one movie that's not going to be on the list, it's American Gangster. But please go ahead.
Wow.
Continue.
It shows America as the land of opportunity, seen from both good ways and bad. Depicts the darker lifestyles of Harlem in the past, and unlike these two, I thought the contrast between Gangster and the authority figures trying to apprehend him was clever, and I thought it added more authenticity to the story. Number 3, American History X. Just shows the uglier, racist side of the American dream fearlessly. I thought Edward Norton and Edward Furlong gave fantastic performances as brothers seeking redemption or lack thereof. And I'll be honest with you, after 2 viewings, the ending still shocks me to my bones. And my number 2, American Graffiti. Probably one of the most clever portraits of American life there is. The music of the time, and the cars of the time for that matter, add for well-placed vignettes that really make the audience as a whole care for each individual character. And despite being a period piece, I honestly firmly believe that the themes are still relevant to young adult life to this very day.
It's a great choice. We just reviewed that one in the Oscar A to Z recently as well. I didn't end up putting it on my list just because it is sort of so new to me. Plus, I wanted to give An American Crime some love. But, of course, my number 1 is...
American Beauty.
Hustle.
American Hustle.
Oh, you know what? To be fair, I forgot about American Beauty somehow. That was not on my list. That would definitely be in my top 5. Yes, I forgot about American Beauty. It is American Hustle. How silly, seeing as how you guys have not revealed your number 1s yet. And
I remember you saying how much
what they are.
You loved it.
Yes, actually, I gave it an A+. It would probably be my number 2. Or maybe my number 1. I don't know. But anyway, what's done is done, and my number 1 is actually American Hustle, which we just talked about recently on the show. I've seen it 3 times now. Love it. I can see this one at some point possibly entering my top 25 of all time. Joe asked me that question when we were reviewing it. Not quite there yet, but I can totally see it happening. Joe?
My number 1 is American Beauty.
Sure.
Because it's probably one of the best dramas ever made, and it's actually a very interesting insight into the American dream, both kind of the bright ideas and the darker nature of it. Great performances, great story, great music, cinematography, effects, editing.
Everything.
Pretty much across
that
the
it
board.
won its awards for.
Just about. I mean, it's a great film, and Kevin Spacey's great, and we talked about it recently. So, yeah, that one, American Beauty.
All right. Justin? I'm going to go out on a limb and say same for you.
And you would be correct. Poses one seemingly simple yet unbelievably complicated question. What is beauty? Be it figuratively or physically or what have you. It's asked brilliantly through the lens of Kevin Spacey's character, through one of his deepest and most twisted characters. And it's as much as a love letter to beauty in its unlikeliest of forms as it is a satire of what popular culture in America does believe is beautiful.
I would agree, and if I had remembered that, we'd probably have a three-peat for number 1.
I was expecting American Beauty.
Well, you know what? That's what's funny about these top 5s. You know, obviously they're unofficial, they're fun kind of lists. Occasionally, we will forget something
I'll
or
say
other.
this much:
This
is probably one of the more consistent, at least with the theme over the last couple. We've had a couple history of top 5s. For all of us,
sputtering wildly out of control.
Kind of some questionable.
Yeah, that is true. You're right. Every movie at least has America somewhere in the title.
Yeah, we all got that right.
Top 5. I love the top 5 though. It's fun to kind of pull everything apart. And if you have not listened to it yet, the mini-sode is now up in tribute of Robin Williams. We all reveal our favorite Robin Williams performances, so check that out on the channel. All right, well, now we have our triple feature of older movies, which has been shortened to a double feature, as we already talked about the old classic Ninja Turtles. So we start with new classic Paranorman. This is a stop-motion animation horror comedy film from Laika, the same company that produced Coraline and the upcoming Box Trolls. It takes place in a small Massachusetts town where 11-year-old Norman Babcock, voiced by Cody Smith-McPhee, who we just discussed last week as the star of A Birder's Guide to Everything, he can speak with the dead. This power alienates him from his family and school peers, except for his best friend Neil, voiced by Tucker Albreze. When his uncle, voiced by John Goodman, dies, he comes to Norman in a vision and tells him that he must save the town by resuming his duties of a secret annual ritual to confront the ghost of a long-deceased witch girl and stop her curse while dealing with zombies of the men and women who originally killed her centuries ago. Jeff Garlin, Leslie Mann, and Anna Kendrick voice Norman's parents and sister. It's an inventive, funny, clever, and actually kind of scary film. I am consistently surprised that it got a PG in this day and age. We were just talking about the ratings. It's the first animated film I can think of targeted at children with an openly gay character, for one thing, and it has unabashed adult themes, but is still so childlike in its approach. It's one of the great films that truly works on multiple levels, completely depending on what age you are. Norman is an exceptionally well-written child, which is another thing we don't often see in animated kids' movies. And the character of Coraline was the same way, so we'll see if they can do the same with the box trolls. There are some jokes that are cornier than others and don't quite work, and it's certainly too scary for kids probably under maybe 7 or 8. But the animation is striking and the script is sharp, and I give it an A-. Joe, you had not seen Paranorman before, so let's hear from you.
No, it was actually one of those ones that I was really interested in seeing for a while, but I somehow kind of missed it.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Coraline, and I like what this studio does. I think they have a very unique style. I like the stop-motion animation. You don't see that done so well on a mass budget these days. And, of course, I do appreciate the throwback to this whole kind of horror comedy. Obviously, a big love of old zombie movies and the like.
Yeah.
It's there. I think the humor's good. Besides the animation and the music, though, I think the thing that really worked for me most was the characters and the voice acting. I think they just created and crafted some really likable, enjoyable young kids that I thought were very believable. I also thought the plot was very interesting and had some pretty cool ideas. And I agree with you, it does work on multiple levels of complexity, depending for adults, kids, or just the family in general.
Yeah.
A lot of different ways you could look at it. So it's got a lot going on a lot of levels. I do think the second act does drag a little bit. But the beginning was really interesting, and the ending was fantastic. So if it wasn't for the middle part kind of lagging a little bit there, it probably would have gotten an A- from me, but it sits pretty comfortably with a B+.
Very nice. Justin?
Don Bluth once said, and I am paraphrasing, but the meaning still holds, "It doesn't matter how dark a story is. If it has a happy ending, kids will be able to take it." This philosophy is something that the stop-motion company Laika has taken completely to heart and made it the center of their 2 films I have seen thus far. Although Paranorman isn't quite as good as their first outing, it's still easily one of the better family films in recent years. While still paying homage to cheesy horror films that lend themselves for an adequate amount of suspense, which, as Dan mentioned, will probably be too much for small children, the film still packs a great message cautioning audiences about jumping to conclusions and letting fear decide. That is something I feel people truly need. It may not be the most upbeat of messages, but Laika hits it home with such tenacity in its visuals and its own cast, particularly from Smith McPhee as the protagonist, struggling to put together just what's gone so terribly wrong in his town. Unfortunately, I thought the use of CGI in the film works really well in some circumstances, such as with the flashback-ish transitions, and others just feel kind of out of place, somewhat during the conclusion where it gets a little
Surreal?
Out of hand, I would argue. Not overbearingly so, but noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
Alongside that, some of the cast feels a little bit underdeveloped, and others I wish the film had spent more time with. It's definitely not without its flaws, but Paranorman is a well-made family film with a ton of heart, and I give it an A-.
I actually like this one a little bit better than Coraline.
Why do you like it better?
Well, I think the themes are better. I mean, everything's kind of better. I like the story more. I like Norman's character more. I mean, Justin sort of hit on all the different themes of, acceptance and not judging people, and I don't know.
I think Paranorman might be a little more accessible, but
I'd agree.
Perhaps.
But I think the story was actually a little meatier in Coraline. I think there's more going on there, personally.
I guess. Well,
I think it's a more adult story.
Yes, it's definitely a more adult story.
Maybe that means
true.
it's not necessarily for kids.
Yeah, it's very scary.
Might be the issue
for kids.
So I think Paranorman's a more balanced family film.
Okay.
I think Coraline.
I could agree with that.
Really isn't a kids film.
No.
I think that a lot of the violence and stuff was mostly played for laughs. I think that the comedy works pretty well. The only stuff that's really dark are maybe some of the themes with the story and the ending.
Yeah, the end is
dark,
very intense.
And also for some parents, there is an openly gay character.
Right.
That might cause some questions. I don't know what the big deal would be, but with the exception of those things, I felt like it was perfectly acceptable. I didn't think it was really that ridiculous. I mean, once again, Lion King, straight up murder. Big point of the movie.
Yeah.
This was 20 years ago, guys, so...
No, I
once
know.
Again,
that is true.
Me and ratings, I don't really,
Yeah, it's true.
Like you said, Don Bluth said it best. They can handle it. Just give them a good resolution.
Classic Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, actually.
Mm-hmm. I mean...
Pretty dark.
Yeah. I mean, I was a little bit frightened about that when I was 4 and I first saw it.
I mean, heck, the scenes in the castle with the witch when she's, alone, locked away. Mm-hmm. It's pretty sad.
It's pretty creepy.
It's pretty sad, and you're like, there really is no hope.
Yeah.
And you feel like, hey, there's no place like
Flying monkeys.
They were pretty scary. The trees, the forest.
The trees, yeah.
Yeah.
Some ominous to it.
I would say so. Well, and, we see that a lot with our Oscar movies. Like, we'll see, a movie from, say, the 40s or 50s.
We're like, whoa.
Where it seems like it's really intense, and you think, well, there were no ratings back then. Kids just went to everything.
And just to get people who get blown away.
Right, All Quiet on the Western Front. Kids, I'm sure, were lining up for that.
Oh, the Great War movie is out. Just thousands of people getting mowed down.
Yes, you're right.
If you think about it, there was a period there, like probably in the 50s and 60s, where that would not get shown.
Right.
So before the ratings, people were a little more flexible. One of the positives of the old days of film.
Well, that is true.
Like that.
And animated shorts as well. I mean, look at how violent, those were.
And even a little offensive.
Racist. And that's very true. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. Maybe we are too sensitive now to stuff like that.
There are pros and cons. I mean, hopefully we have grown as a society, so we'll make better choices.
All right, well, our final film, speaking of the Oscar nominee, is American Splendor. It's a 2003 film nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay for writer and directors Sherry Springer Berman and Robert Pulcini, I'm not sure. And Justin's going to tell us about that.
Harvey Picar, played by Paul Giamatti, is an everyday file clerk for a hospital, truly getting by with a little help from his friends, such as the heavily opinionated Mr. Boats, played by Earl Billings, to nerd and proud Troy Radloff, played by Judah Friedlander. However, when he notices that his friend and fellow artist Robert Crumb, played by James Urbaniak, hope I pronounced that right, is finding success with his underground comics geared more towards adults, Harvey crafts his own brand of comic, drawing on the various characters around him for a no-holds-barred depiction of life called American Splendor. Art imitates life, but rare is the time that it's so blunt and hard-hitting as evident in American Splendor. Giamatti plays award-winning comic book writer Harvey Picar with such dedication and detail that is only complemented by the personal interviews with the actual man himself. While this sometimes feels as if it's getting in the way, feeling as if it can't decide between whether it wants to be a biopic or a mockumentary, there's no denying the authentic feel it gives to the film when it needs it. Though where American Splendor truly works is with Picar simply roaming about, quietly observing the quirky, wacky characters around him who end up serving as the inspiration for a variety of different comic book issues. It often causes one to question Picar's likability, but the man has quite a bit to say. But how he chooses to do so will leave audiences with a number of different takes on the man. Overall, American Splendor is a fascinating look inside the mind of a man who is just the right level of quirky to make for an interesting subject for a biopic, and I give it a B+.
Well, it's certainly one of the most creative biopics in its tone and aesthetic. Having the scene transitions as the text blocks from comic books works very well. And, of course, having Picar himself do the narrating and showing up in person in some scenes is not something that you'd see in every biopic. I'm actually surprised, though, it got a screenplay nomination, as the structure and the script itself is a bit erratic. I feel the nomination should have gone to Giamatti, who's the driving force that keeps the movie afloat. I also am not sure how to feel about them using the actual Letterman clips when Picar would guest, instead of redoing them with Giamatti. Although the one time they tried that, the man portraying Letterman was horrible, so, I guess I could go either way on that. But it's another erratic thing about the film, go all the way or not at all. Overall, it's certainly an interesting film. Maybe it would be an interesting study for a film class because of its uniqueness. I wouldn't say, though, it demands to be seen by the general public. I give it a B. Joe?
All right. Well, for American Splendor, I just have to say right now, Giamatti always gives a great performance.
Fantastic.
And as always, he really elevates this movie. The story is interesting and has some really cool elements. I like the style of the film. But I kind of wanted more of those introspective monologues. I think if we just had more of Giamatti portraying this man, I think as long as it was holding to the groundwork of the comics and this man's life, it still would have been authentic, even necessarily without Picar or some of those transitions. I think it was cool what they were going for, really showing the action with the Letterman shows and whatnot, and the interviews. But I'm not entirely sure it worked that well. Maybe more.
Yeah, I don't know if it was all necessary.
It could have. I still could have done with some of the comic book transitions or something along those lines. But we didn't necessarily, I think, need all those intercuts. The character does feel bogged down by the events around him. I didn't feel like we really got to know him quite as well as we could have. I thought he's a very interesting man, but it seemed like it was mostly surface. Therefore, some aspects of the story aren't quite as believable since it is from one man's perspective. I often make the joke about the scene in the comic book store where all of his comics are sold out, which I know isn't true.
It's so ridiculous.
I know that. I mean, American Splendor is fascinating, but it's an underground comic for a reason. I'm pretty sure Spider-Man sold out more. 1975, I mean, this is Marvel at its height. I'm sorry that scene just bothered me. Also, his future wife, who is a character I'm not entirely sure how I'm supposed to feel about in the movie. She just says that she had a copy reserved for herself, and then it was sold or stolen or lost. Dumb scene. I'm sorry. The film sometimes is unpleasant, but I think that's the point of this man's life and what he's trying to go for. Ultimately, though, it's held up, as I said before, by Giamatti's charm and really good performance. I just wish we had more of that and less of the unbalanced story elements and intercuts. But I give it a B as well.
And it should be noted that Picard's real-life wife that you're talking about, she appears in some of the
For one scene,
the Picard scenes as well.
like one or two scenes, and she didn't say anything. And there's a
No,
scene where he goes,
she's just there.
he's
Well, I think she did talk once, didn't she?
I mean, like, in regards to, like, what...
a line or two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's commenting on something that just happened in the movie.
That's one reason why I kind of wonder about the genuineness of the story, because it's obviously being told mostly from his perspective. It's like, oh yeah, I think I'm portraying her as well as I can in the comics in this film. Well, if that's the case, I hate this character, this
Right.
person.
If that's the case, you're horrible.
There are times where you can honestly argue we're supposed to hate Harvey. I mean, some of the stuff he says is pretty...
I got
Pretty heated.
Well, my perspective was that this man was angry because
Yeah.
he had a lot of issues. Yeah, he says some things, but for the most part, I thought it was understandable. I thought he was a very relatable, down-to-earth guy who was just trying to vent.
Yeah, I maybe found him a bit annoying at times, but
I thought he was either...
I wasn't angry at him or I didn't hate him.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Even in those moments where we don't necessarily find him the most likable, I still found myself drawn to what he was trying to say.
That's true. Like I said, I feel like he's bogged down by the events of the story around him. My favorite scene in the movie, I think Danny might agree, is the scene where he just kind of gives that introspective monologue, and it's just him kind of reflecting on these ideas.
I really did like that.
That was an awesome scene. I wanted more scenes like those. Mm-hmm. A little more direct, perhaps, but held up by Giamatti's performance and this man's writing. It was pretty powerful stuff. I thought the actual narrative itself was weak at points.
That's why I was surprised for the screenplay nomination.
Yeah, I say Giamatti should have gotten
of
an
everything in that movie, it was, for me, Giamatti all the way.
Maybe some of the cinematography or editing, but...
I feel like if they had just trimmed down some of the, like, real-life mockumentary stuff and just focused on the depiction of the central storyline, we would have gotten easily an A- film at minimum.
I could agree with that. Or just do a straight mockumentary.
Yeah.
Pick one.
Yeah, one or the other, just not interspersed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, like I said, go all the way or don't do it at all. The Letterman clips were fine and it was interesting, but
then they mix them up.
And then the last one they have, obviously, I guess they couldn't get the rights to that clip or something.
Or maybe it got cut, or there's like a back
or maybe because of what happened in the episode.
And Letterman was like, no.
They never ended up airing it, so maybe NBC destroyed the tape. I don't know, but they have.
Well, you can bet Letterman wouldn't have allowed that.
Yeah, but he doesn't work for NBC anymore, so he has no control over.
Well, would have NBC ever allowed that?
Library.
Because it would kind of show them in a bad light.
No, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Obviously, you might have.
WNBC.
Would a talk show host really go that low in terms of like just bringing on a guy who's clearly trying to say something and just basically reduce him to being essentially a talk show court jester?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, especially when you're on it that late at night. I mean,
you got to entertain people somehow.
Yeah, you use what's at your disposal. I mean, if you've ever watched the Craig Kilborn show, or not Craig Kilborn,
Ferguson.
I hate that guy, the Craig Ferguson show, he doesn't even talk to the celebrities about their projects. They just have a chat and joke around. It's like it's pretty freeform, and I'm sure that all happened the way it was portrayed in the movie.
I mean, they try to have serious discussions when they can, but for the most part, it's comedy. Like he even says in the movie, "Hey, this is a comedy show."
Right.
Like people want to see me laugh.
Stop being so political.
Well, and I mean, Letterman specifically has always sort of had those, as you put it, court jesters. After Picard, it was Richard Simmons for like 10 years, and then Regis Philbin, and he always has had people on just to kind of poke fun at, and they had this like back and forth, and I guess obviously with Picard it sort of
backfired.
It sort of backfired. It sort of ended up preceding his fame, which is especially hit home in that scene where the kid comes up to him in the restaurant and says, hey, I love your Letterman stuff. And Picard's like, oh well, you should buy one of my comic books, so, support me that way. So I thought that was interesting. It was included. But I thought the handling of it was a little weird.
And how do you feel about his nerd friend? The awesome acting.
I I hated him so much. Judah Friedlander, who I love on 30 Rock, I hated his portrayal of this nerd so much. And then at the end of the movie, we meet the actual nerd.
Spot on.
And it's spot on.
Yeah.
That blew me away because I was like, this is the most insulting, like, hideous nerd impression. And then they show the real guy, and it's like, wow, that's him, all right.
That's kind of scary.
No, that's absolutely true.
Great acting, though.
Yeah, actually.
I guess so.
I knew I liked Judah Friedlander for some reason. All right, well, that is going to wrap it up for the show this week. Like I mentioned briefly earlier, we do have a mini-sode available in tribute of Robin Williams. And, just talking about his great movies. And Joe has a wonderful tribute on the Merlin page as well that you should check out. And then you guys are going to be doing the controversial movies coming up, right?
Yep, we're editing together The Last Temptation of Christ. It'll be the first episode in that series.
Perfect.
And you can also check out my most recent reviews of Guardians of the Galaxy and Turtles. There might be an Expendables review coming up, but at the very least there will be Sin City 2 in the next couple weeks.
Very nice. All right, well, you can join the fun here on our Facebook group. It's Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. You can check out our 5-word reviews there weekly. Our Twitter feed is @FilmFanaticsPod. And also, if you have not subscribed yet to our channel here on YouTube, go ahead and do that. We'd love to have you aboard. And that's going to do it for this week. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.